Okay, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for taking the time to join us for our session today. My name is Carolyn Anger. I'm a Senior Director at Consilio, the President of the Toronto chapter of ACEDS, and I will be your moderator for our session today. We have an amazing panel on Microsoft 365 for corporate law departments planned for you, where we'll be talking about everything from industry trends to roadmaps. Today's session is the first of a two-part series, with the second session scheduled for Wednesday, September 29th at 1 p.m. Eastern. At this time, I would like to thank Consilio for generously sponsoring today's event. Before we get into our agenda, please connect with us if you are in Toronto or the Ontario region and want to know more about ACEDS and our Toronto chapter. You can connect with us via email at toronto@aceds.org, on Twitter at ACEDS or visit our webpage at toronto.aceds.org. Our agenda for today: after introductions to our stellar panel, we'll dive into industry trends, M365 and EDiscovery product comparisons, and a licensing presentation, followed by a discussion on products, APIs, and a roadmap. We'll wrap up with some final Q&A, but if you have questions, please put them into the Q&A box throughout the webinar, and we'll address them as we go through today's session. If we don't get to all questions, we'll do our best to provide answers during the subsequent session, so please stay tuned. I'm happy to introduce our incredible speakers who are all experts in their respective fields. And after I introduce each person, I'd like to ask them to tell us a fun fact about themselves. Jennifer Knox. Jennifer is a director in the Consilio Consulting Group. Jennifer's broad data analytics and EDiscovery industry expertise includes technical product and service delivery, largely in the financial services space. In these roles, she works closely with legal, records management, and information security teams to drive legal and information governance technology strategy, all while protecting critical enterprise information. Hi, Jennifer. Tell us a fun fact about yourself.
Hey, all. Thanks so much for joining. I don't mean to brag, but I've been told that I make the world's best banana bread.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to trying that one day. Thanks, Jennifer. Rachi Messing. Rachi is a senior program manager at Microsoft in the corporate, external, and legal affairs department based out of their Israel office. In his current role, he works to promote and manage the usage of advanced technology solutions, allowing the EDiscovery team to be efficient and effective in handling their active dockets. Formerly part of the Equivio management team, he joined Microsoft through the acquisition in January 2015, where he spent 3 years working in the Office 365 Information Protection product group, managing their EDiscovery, data governance, and compliance features. Hi, Rachi. Tell us a fun fact about yourself.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me on. The fun fact that I'm going to go with today is that my first job ever was actually working in the Orioles Memorial Stadium in one of the food kiosks. I got a job when I was 15, which then allowed me to basically watch every home Orioles game for 2 seasons. So that's my fun fact.
Amazing. You are a star for all of the Baltimore teams.
Yes.
And next we have Nick Robinson. Nick is a principal program manager in the Office 365 security, compliance, and management team focused on the EDiscovery solutions area. Nick brings experience in product marketing, customer service, and product management to his role, helping to define features that will help customers reduce the time and cost associated with common EDiscovery workflows. Nick, please tell us a fun fact about yourself.
Hey, everyone. Great to be here. Thanks for having me. Exciting day. So fun fact, I guess I'll borrow Jennifer not to brag, but earlier this summer, I had the chance to hike up and ski down Mount Adams, which is one of our large volcanoes that we have here in Washington State. And it was during the historic heat dome event that we had out here. I'm not sure if you saw it in the news, but it's very unusual for us to have over 100-degree weather. And when I was able to do this little trip, it was during that time. So it was kind of interesting confluence of events. So a little fun fact there.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Thank you. Okay, thanks everyone. We're going to get started. I'll turn it over to Jennifer.
Hello again. If everyone is able to kind of sit through today in our next session, maybe we can share some banana bread facts and some photos from the days at Memorial Stadium and the hike up that mountain at the end of our next session. That would be a lovely little synchronicity there. So I'm going to be talking about the industry trends here that I've been seeing. In my work at Consilio with the Discovery Consulting Group for the last few years, I've really focused on the Microsoft compliance tools, largely EDiscovery, retention, and then some data classification style projects as well. And a lot of the work in the Discovery Consulting Group is proactive rather than reactive, right? We're sitting with the various stakeholders. We're supporting those corporate legal and IT departments with their EDiscovery programs, with their data governance programs, with all of those big initiatives, right, to prepare for the organization for litigation. But in addition to that, one of my side gigs at Consilio is we've run for the past 3 years, I think at this point nearly, a monthly M365 EDiscovery users group. And we talk about key topics, prevailing issues, and the kind of upcoming releases in those sessions. And then we just have a general discussion about what everyone's been seeing, what issues they're seeing, and kind of a broad across industries and functional groups, just kind of what they're experiencing. So from those kind of two positions, I've kind of called out the big trends that I've seen specifically in the 2020 to 2021 COVID timeframe. And that's what we'll be talking about in the next few slides. So some would say that I spend an awful lot of my time, especially since March 2020, talking about Teams, the collaboration application, the EDiscovery implications there, but it's broader than that. Definitely a hot topic and something we'll be talking about today, but there's some other big topics that I want to make sure that we're talking about. One big kind of mindset shift that I've noticed is many organizations, and this is really broader than 365, is rather than using a one-size-fits-all business process for all types of EDiscovery and all types of data gathering and review efforts, a lot of organizations are kind of making a mindset shift there, and taking a look at the individual types of matters and the categories of matters that can be treated in particular ways. What rises to the level of needing the big guns, the big data processing, the giant productions, and what's kind of a smaller type of matter. Of course, we've seen a lot of discussion about Teams collaboration. A lot of organizations rolled that out during the course of 2020 or 2021, and there's some EDiscovery implications there. Additionally, the kind of rollout of Azure Information Protection, kind of a broad scale rollout of that, and the decryption and protection elements that can apply to the documents that are protected by AIP, that has EDiscovery implications as well, and we'll be talking about that. And then kind of another broad trend, not as specific to the last 2 years, but something that I've noticed over the last 3 years, is kind of a narrowing of the divide between your traditional records management professionals and your traditional EDiscovery management professionals. And I'm seeing a lot more projects where the legal department and legal operations, EDiscovery operations, are kind of kickstarting the interest in an information governance program, a data management program, and the usage of those retention policies. So digging a little bit deeper on each of those. Up first, I think pre-2020 and historically, there was a big mindset shift specifically around the data that was in 365. Organizations that had a really mature EDiscovery program or even a medium to high maturity level were viewing 365 as a, we'll call it a quote, data source. I need to go to that data source and capture information during my EDiscovery process, just like I go out to my network shares, just like I go out to current on-premise SharePoint, just like I go out to my email archive and pull the data in. There was less of a focus on what the tool set offered and what you could use that tool set for. And I've noticed that shift in the last, again, 18 months, 19 months at this point. And it's really shifted to 365 is a really powerful toolkit. And I can use that to simplify and improve the end-to-end EDiscovery processes there. Right, not all of your EDiscovery matters are created equal. You can kind of parse out from your historical record of case types, what volumes you're seeing and what volumes and types of matters really make sense to run through particular workflows. And kind of, taking stock of that and kind of identifying your right technology stack for your different types of matters is something that's just a really useful project. It can save you a lot of money, it can reduce your risk, and we'll certainly talk about that more. So your key takeaways here are thinking about things differently. Rather than collecting information in order to preserve it, 365 will give you that opportunity to preserve the information in place instead of retrieving and kind of creating this copy or this extra record of information. Another thing to think about is culling your data, searching, date range, all of the above, searching with keywords or date range, culling that information before you collect, running a really broad set of search terms on your data and pulling back only what's necessary to meet the responsive needs for that matter. And then again, creating multiple workflows with decision trees to help identify where your core EDiscovery and your advanced EDiscovery tools that you have in 365 are your best fit for a particular matter.
Jen, I'm going to add in on that point that, one of the things that in talking to a lot of my colleagues in corporate legal departments, they're afraid of having to shift their entire process by when they move to Microsoft 365. And I think one of the keys is how to adopt your current process, but recognize the fact that some things do have to change throughout the process. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next webinar in part 2. But really, one of the biggest things that a lot of, especially the legal personnel, just aren't thinking of is the fact that, the bandwidth issues that exist by moving the data into the cloud are going to just be a physical limitation that people have to deal with, and therefore might force them to shift some of their processes. Not necessarily everything, but it's just one of those things that you absolutely have to be aware of when you're trying to figure out how am I going to approach the data that's sitting in Microsoft 365.
Great point. And one of the key additional callouts, not on this slide, but something that I like to use as an example. Every organization that I speak to has a particular case type. It may not be handled by the legal department, but it's often handled by the operational folks or the technical folks who are pulling data. It might be an HR investigation or an audit investigation that isn't quite something that the litigation department handles, but it, as Rachi was saying, it pulls on the same resources. So capturing 3 or 4 mailboxes and pulling it out of the system isn't going to, overwhelm the export function. But if you could figure out a way to not export as much data or not export data at all, that would certainly kind of free up the resources for those larger matters. So one thing that I I think is a really helpful way to think about it, is think about the weighing of, risk, avoiding risk, and, either reducing costs, real costs, or avoiding certain other costs, and ways to kind of increase efficiency. And kind of thinking back to our HR investigation, audit investigation type workflow, when you're extracting information from 365 for an email review, for an HR investigation, you're creating a copy of the data. You're creating a situation where someone has to perform a document review task in likely an inefficient platform. They're probably either mounting a PST or searching through MSG files on a shared drive. And there's inherent risk, of course, with copying the data external to the system. There's external, there's risks associated with someone opening those files inside of Outlook and having Outlook functions be available during their review. And it may not be a true cost to have someone performing that review inefficiently, but it is certainly a cost that could be avoided or at least optimized to have that individual able to, ratchet up the number of matters that they can investigate in a week or in a month to have that review be done efficiently. So your earlier workflows are going to, quote unquote, get the job done, exporting the data, reviewing the data in whatever method, but kind of thinking about, a better practice, moving that kind of workflow into an advanced e-discovery will increase the kind of speed to insight that those folks have. They can find and locate those individual key documents much more quickly. It improves your overall process efficiency. And again, it's not creating those extra copies of data that then need to be managed external to the system. So again, reduces risk, avoids costs, increases efficiency, good for everyone, 3 check boxes. Jumping into kind of our next bullet is obviously that COVID impact. When we all started working from home in earnest last March, or 2 years ago now, March, a lot of organizations rolled out the Teams collaboration suite. Obviously, that was something that was happening as a natural or in the natural order of things. But I found a lot of organizations that I've spoken to did a really lightning quick rollout in March, April, May of 2020, and perhaps rolled that out with a little bit less foresight, a little less due diligence than they normally would roll out a massive enterprise application. So perhaps, not throwing anyone under the bus here, but perhaps those rollouts didn't include feedback that normally would have been included in the process. They didn't include information governance. They didn't include legal or e-discovery technology in the decision to roll out the platform. And therefore, a lot of organizations that I've spoken to in the last year are kind of just in the last few months coming up on the first matters where the team's data is really at issue and being included. And there's some surprises in the way it's stored and where it's stored and all of that they need to get their arms around. So kind of that really, really quick rollout has kind of put legal and e-discovery technical role folks in kind of on their back foot and in kind of a reactive position. So a couple of the kind of key implications that you need to get your arms around if your organization did roll out Teams or is planning to roll out Teams is you do need to understand where the data gets stored. There's a couple different locations that the data is stored in, depending on whether it's a Teams chat or whether it's a Teams site post, and where the files that are shared through those methods, where those get stored to. There's also some nuance about what can be collected. Most of your kind of key communication information, your files, and the calendars that exist inside of the team sites, all of that can be collected. And there's been a move over the last probably year at this point almost on the recorded meetings being available. But knowing what can be captured is really critical, and what cannot be captured, and what methods you have available to capture that information, either using the EDiscovery tools in Microsoft or using other methods to kind of gather that information. And then, of course, for our legal EDiscovery folks who are further down the EDRM, you do need to codify, develop best practices for reviewing and producing that information, thinking about things like conversation threading, and how to deal with the modern attachment linkage between the chat element and the shared file. And I'll pause there in case there's questions, or if anyone on the Microsoft side wants to jump in.
We do have a question, Jennifer, just about the slide where you talk about doing more in one place. And the question is just if you could expand on what that means a bit more.
Okay, and on this slide?
Yep.
Sure, okay. Just wanted to make sure we had the visual right. So inside of 365, and of course, Nick or Rachi, you can correct my interpretation of this. When you're using a tool like Core EDiscovery, or you're using a third-party tool to extract information from 365, you're going into where the data lives. You're potentially doing a quick cull of the information, maybe by keyword, maybe by date range, and you're pulling the data out of Azure and making a copy of that data. Then you're running it through your normal EDRM processing, hosting, review kind of workflow. When you're using a tool like Advanced EDiscovery, that information is staying inside of the walls of Azure, and not, a copy is being created, but it's not getting created and stored external to Azure. So the protections, the general protections of Azure apply to that data. So it's really about kind of pushing this slide is really about pushing the amount of data that comes out of your system to, reducing the amount of data that comes out of the system, right? So identifying those workflows where you can keep the data in the system all the way through the process until you need to export your handful of documents, right? So that's really where we're going here.
Thank you, that's helpful.
All right. So our third kind of key trend here is Azure information protection, and specifically decryption, but there are certainly other protections that can apply. So over the course of probably the last 9 to 12 calendar months, I've started to get a lot of questions on organizations who are rolling out AIP, the protection tools, and using it for DLP, data loss prevention. And this is, again, another one of those areas where this is really a security function, but your EDiscovery folks really do need to understand how this works and how it differs with, quote unquote, classic encryption, so that you can understand how that's going to impact your EDiscovery process. It's something that I've seen a lot of organizations adopt and roll out with great success, but potentially with kind of the drawback being that the EDiscovery organization is, again, in a reactive position instead of in a proactive position to kind of develop their processes to decrypt the data before, before it's needed. So the difference here is that with your classic encryption, so you do file or container encryption, it's long been an EDiscovery pickle for sure, but typically organizations have either solved that internally or had their vendor resolve it for them during data processing or data normalization phases, usually through brute force password cracking. But this encryption that we're talking about here for the data protected by AIP, that encryption is a little bit different. And again, I welcome a more technical explanation of this from the Microsoft folks, but the way I've trained my brain to understand it is that the encryption is calling home, right? It's calling back to its home tenant, calling its mom, and asking the home tenant if it's allowed to decrypt itself. And because of that, you need to decrypt the information differently. You can't just brute force password crack the files. Nick or Rachi, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
No, I think you've captured the main piece of it, the bottom line is that it is tenant specific, meaning client specific, the customer, the corporation, whoever it is, and it's encryption that is based off of rights that have been given, and they can vary in terms of what the actual encryption level is and what you're allowed or not allowed to do with the file. Which can have an impact on e-discovery and everything from whether or not you can search for that file, whether or not you can, get it as a result, but can you read it, or can you export it? Can you export it in a way that the attorneys are going to be able to actually access the data once it's out of the system? So it's really important to understand all the different differences in how these work.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, Rachi, this is Nick. I think you explained it really well, Jennifer. Just add that, decryption and kind of reducing the hurdles around this in the process has definitely been a top feedback from customers. And so what we've done over the last year or so is tried to get really good at our own encryption technology, so that for MIP, for RMS, if you have the right role and you're collecting the right content, we'll kind of do that in the process. Now, as Rachi mentions, there's a lot of different permutations and types of encryption that can be utilized. And so we're not able to cover everything, but for the stuff that kind of we're providing for customers who are kind of fully adopted into the Microsoft 365 cloud, we want things to work really well. There's a pretty detailed document that goes through different scenarios and calls out some of the nuances that might be good as a follow-up, but I agree this is a really important topic for a lot of customers.
Yep, and to that point, right, the e-discovery process is a little bit impacted, right? So for your e-discovery tools, especially your advanced e-discovery, those tools have the permission base essentially to decrypt for core e-discovery certain files. If you're exporting from core e-discovery as MSG, you'd be able to decrypt your email attachments. Advanced e-discovery can do the email attachments as well as the files that are native to a SharePoint OneDrive environment. If you're utilizing third-party collection tools, if you have a legal hold tool that plugs into 365, or if you've written PowerShell commands, you may need to test out a decryption workflow using PowerShell commands to decrypt. And again, you have a couple points in the process where it makes sense to do that decryption prior to sending to your law firm or your vendor. That would be, an internal IT or e-discovery technologist decrypting all of the data before it gets sent out. Have your vendor identify those files and decrypt on your behalf, which requires, that they have the access to do that. Or you could kind of pass the decryption problem along to the document review phase and identify only, critical documents that may require decryption, right? So the number of files will decrease as you go through this process, but the right place in the process to decrypt is really kind of an up to the organization, or maybe even something that you decide on a case-by-case basis.
Right, but an important piece here, and someone had asked whether it's actually decrypting on the fly as you collect. It does depend on what you define as your collection. So if it is using RMS that's built into the M365 system, then because you, the client, have entrusted Microsoft with the keys to that encryption, it allows the tool to actually access that data and run the searches as long as the administrator, the e-discovery user, is actually granted the rights to be able to do that, and to be able to export data in a decrypted manner. So there are still protections that can be in place, but the bottom line is that if I am pulling that data out for EDiscovery purposes, meaning for my attorneys to actually look at and then be able to produce in most cases, it doesn't help if that data is protected throughout the entire way in a way that no one can actually access it and read it. So we'll dig we can dig a little bit deeper into encryption and some of the tips and tricks in part 2. But the bottom line is, as Jennifer's pointing out, that encryption and the push to have more protections on data does absolutely have an impact on the EDiscovery process.
Mm-hmm. And then just my last tip and trick from a more consultative place, if you're hearing in your organization that this is something that your security group or your InfoSec or IT group is planning on rolling out, get yourself a seat at the table as a member of the legal department, so that you can be aware of how and what may be applied, and have your key law firms, your key EDiscovery vendors test out a workflow with you, so that you know that things will be seamless once that is implemented. And last up, kind of this convergence, right, of information governance and EDiscovery. So these are somewhat related disciplines that often exist in different departments at a lot of organizations and often don't work together, or sometimes particularly well together. So, outside of your regulatory requirements, your audit needs, some organizations will have this kind of gray space where they live, trying to determine what's the right size for data retention. Where do we sort and keep our key documents? How do we gather those when it's time for EDiscovery? All of that is something, especially at a larger organization, is something that's stored in a lot of different minds in a lot of different departments. And again, until recently, there was a lot of technology gaps there. There was maybe a records management system and maybe a data classification tool that existed at an organization that touched, right, those key records, or those key types of information that were classified, maybe HR documents, maybe financial documents, that sort of thing. But inside of 365, there's this kind of broad availability and ease of use for a bunch of different retention tools and data classification tools that give the opportunity for those cross-functional groups to come together and figure out a way to kind of right size that program and roll it out with relative ease. Oftentimes, I've probably done 5 or 6 of these projects in the last 2 years, where determining the appropriate length of time to retain data is what takes up the most time in the project. The actual technical implementation is fairly straightforward for the most part. So within 365, there's a series of information governance tools that can help organizations meet their retention obligations, meet their needs. The first 2 on the left-hand side that you do need to understand kind of the difference of, the ways they can be applied, are your retention labels versus your retention policies. I like to think of the labels as a way to tag individual files. You can also use them on larger sets of data, but I like that you can drill into an individual file. Those labels are, at the document level and can travel throughout the 365 environment, whereas your policy is a location-specific time frame that data will be retained for, and then either deleted by an automated process, or just kind of left to be deleted through employee action. And then, because I know we have a lot of folks here that are EDiscovery professionals, you do need to understand the impacts to the data that Pond Legal hold. There's great articles on Microsoft documentation about the principles of retention. That's something that you'd want to input into Bing to look up. That will walk you through kind of the process for how how the retention labels and policies can get applied, but just know if you're using the preserve and place functionality in 365, the legal hold functionality in 365, that will typically supersede your retention labels and your retention policy, and those files will not be deleted even if they are surpassing, you know, an applied retention policy or retention timeframe. Any questions on data retention or any of the trends that we've been talking about? Okay. Last up on my monologue is a product comparison. So in 365, you have several different ways to gather information and export it from the system. We're going to talk about two of those products, the EDiscovery tools. So there's core EDiscovery and advanced EDiscovery. Obviously, given the naming of advanced EDiscovery, you would expect it to have more bells and whistles, and that is certainly the case. I've kind of called out some key areas, key functionality buckets. There's obviously more in each application, but generally speaking, the ability to create a case and identify custodians, the ability to preserve data in place, cull data for collection, and export data are the functions that you get out of your core EDiscovery tool. You do have the ability to use that native index, enterprise search, to cull data before you export, thereby reducing, you know, kind of the load that you're pulling out of the case, out of the system. And then for advanced EDiscovery, you have, again, a few more bells and whistles. You have the ability to not only create cases, identify custodians, place those in place preservation holds. You can also distribute, track, and acknowledge legal hold notices across your organization. You can cull data for collection and create analysis and review sets for that data, where you can perform a little bit more flexible searching functionality and have the ability to do near dupe detection and other kind of higher end features. You also get the ability to review all of the documents that hit on your term and or perform some sampling to kind of get an idea of what will hit on your data on your terms. And then you have the opportunity to export data, but again, the exported data here would be kind of potentially post-reviewed, but certainly post-processed, because there is a processing capability inside of advanced EDiscovery.
And Jen, one thing that I'll point out here that we take advantage of a lot is the fact that in advanced EDiscovery, when you're exporting the data, you're able to export it out in a process state. So your all of your emails and attachments and everything broken apart, and extracted text files and all of your metadata, which just from, again, an efficiency and cost savings perspective, it is really, really beneficial, because then you don't have to send that data through processing and paying per gig. It's already coming out in a format that's pretty much ready to go into one of your review tools, if it's gonna go that far into one of the EDiscovery review tools. So just something to keep in mind. And again, we'll focus a little bit more on that later.
All right. We'll circle back to questions at the end. I'm going to hand off to, let me cover this real quick, and then I will hand off to Nick. The licensing structure in 365 is a little bit more complicated than we have time to really dive into here. But generally speaking, if you have the E3 license, you would have access to core EDiscovery. If you have the E5 license, you would have access to advanced EDiscovery, among other functionality in the system. You are also able to do compliance or EDiscovery and audit add-ons to an E3 license that would get you the advanced EDiscovery tool. And that's for the enterprise enterprise model, excuse me. And you can also do hybrid licensing where you purchase a certain number of licenses that can be used for advanced e-discovery. Just a quick note, what I have bolded here, the custodians that are added to the matters in advanced e-discovery are the seats that need that license, not the operator necessarily of the tool. And that can be, again, E5 or with those add-ons to an E3 license. And with that, I will hand off to Nick.
Awesome. Thanks, Jennifer. Great. So I see some questions rolling in. We'll try to handle those as we go. But what I thought I'd do is to talk a little bit about kind of the context of eDiscovery and the Microsoft 365 product suite and kind of how the different components fit together. And then a little bit about where the eDiscovery pieces fit against the EDRM, and then go into a handful of new features that are really in response to kind of what we've been seeing in the market and what we've been hearing from some of our key customers. So let's just jump in. I'll go through a handful of things pretty quickly, and then we'll circle back to the questions and identify what we want to go deeper on for the tips and tricks session. And so, great. So this is really about just sharing kind of the different component parts of what make up the Microsoft 365 compliance kind of suite of solutions. So as Jennifer was saying, we have retention capabilities, information protection capabilities, some of those encryption bits that we talked about built in with Microsoft Information Protection and information governance. And then we have also a set of risk management tools like insider risk, communication compliance for supervision scenarios or kind of other monitoring, and of course, eDiscovery with both core and advanced eDiscovery capabilities. And then also compliance management to kind of help understand where your organization is vis-a-vis common regulations or even specific ones to your organization. So starting out with a checklist and giving you an assessment of where you are relative to a regulation like GDPR. And so together, what we're seeing is a lot of value for customers as they come into the cloud to say, hey, a lot of these things are going to be now really helped out or enabled by some of the solutions that we actually have in Microsoft 365. So I just wanted to set that context of kind of the suite and the suite of solutions we have. Now for eDiscovery, we have core, we have advanced. Jennifer did an awesome job of breaking down kind of the features and what fits where. One thing we found helpful is to just kind of lay out where these solutions fit vis-a-vis the EDRM. And so, of course, on the left side, we have information governance, helping you with your retention schedules and your records. And then, core eDiscovery, kind of that smaller blue box, has really been about, hey, give me my data. Let me have the data out of there, and I'm going to go handle it in these other places. And then the larger blue box is advanced, and really this came from customers saying, to the point earlier around in place, hey, this amount of data that we have now in Microsoft 365 is tremendous, and it's kind of unwieldy. And we actually need ways to manage this data where it is prior to exporting it out, because exporting kind of this massive amount of content that we're generating just becomes very difficult and costly for a number of different reasons. And kind of Rachi will talk about those and has highlighted some of those. And so we wanted to expand to cover more of that EDRM. So as Rachi mentioned, the export you get from AED is actually processed and you're ready to go into your review tool, versus if you're taking out a core, you have some work you have to do to get it to that point. So this is a little bit about how we see those products laying into the EDRM and then how we see them being valuable for our customers. So next up, just wanted to kind of tee up some of the things that we're seeing. I loved when Jennifer went through and talked about the mindset shift, kind of pre-2020, and then now. I think there's a lot of factors that have kind of added up to where we are today. And of course, the pandemic has been, a universal experience and factor for everybody. But there's also been kind of, different forces at play in terms of digital transformation and some of the move to the cloud that we were seeing that have really accelerated. And so some of the trends that we've seen that we think are really important and we see reflected in the features that customers want and are starting to use heavily are things like the intensity of cloud collaboration. So kind of moving into shared files in OneDrive and into SharePoint and doing chat-based collaboration around those files, kind of that, of course, being remote also accelerates this, but it's kind of that cloud productivity and collaboration is really continuing to be something that we see driving a lot of demand. Of course, Teams explosion, I loved how Jennifer talked about, hey, this is a urgent evaluation, a lightning fast deployment. So Teams is growing tremendously fast. And then we also hear from our customers, hey, we need scale, we need speed. When we think of e-discovery, we have to be able to do things quickly, and we need to be able to do things at a large scale. And then with that goes automation. And so a lot of customers are saying, hey, we need to be able to automate, have repeatable, consistent processes that we can manage around this. And so those have been, as I think over the last year or two, kind of some of the top themes that we've heard from customers and informed some of our development. And so with those, I want to kind of now turn the page to a few different features that have come out and just kind of talk about what's now available. And then in some cases, how we're kind of iterating also into the future to add more features. So we talked a little bit about cloud attachments. I think there's some Q&A. This cloud attachment area is a really interesting one, and it's something that we've been seeing a fair amount of adoption from. And I'll have to get Rachi to weigh in here as well. But I wanted to kind of hit a couple of key points where, hey, today you can collect kind of the current version of that cloud attachment. So if I share a file and we continue iterating on it, and I elect to collect that, it's responsive to the scope of my query or the scope of my collection, then the service is going to go out and kind of grab that file from where it lives in SharePoint or OneDrive and bring that back into the collection. Even if the file's not responsive, but the email, the communication is responsive and has been defined, and you say, hey, I want those cloud attachments. So we'll go and bring that current version in. We do also provide the option today to collect all versions. Now, this can be a little bit unwieldy, but if you're really looking for that needle in the haystack and you want to grab all versions of that file, you can do that. And then once they're in the review set, you can further narrow and refine, do keyword search, filter on properties, and so on and so forth. But once you collect those files, then you have them in the context of the communication in the review set. And that's kind of what you're seeing in the screenshot here is I've got the different files that have been a part of this communication, in this case, a Teams chat. I'm looking at them in the review, and I can understand kind of what was the communication around that, what was included in the file. Very similar to the experience that we understand and want to build on from the local attachments that were kind of the paradigm for some time. Want to kind of adopt that into the cloud attachments model as well. And then future, a top request and something we're working on now, and it will be coming out. It's on the roadmap, so keep an eye on the roadmap. Is around, hey, the version that was shared of the cloud attachment. And that's actually the relevant version. And I want to find that version so that, if I'm collaborating with Rachi and I send him a file via cloud attachment, that actual one that I sent to him at that time is what I'm interested in, not the subsequent files that have been iterated over time. And so what we've done is we've partnered with the retention team and to create a specific retention policy to capture these shared versions of the cloud attachments in the preservation hold library. And then once they're captured there, you can e-discover those as well. So actually here you can see, hey, that file that's kind of highlighted is the shared version. And it's the sender is the SharePoint system. It has kind of that unique name. And that way I can understand specifically kind of what that shared version of the file said and what the state of it was at that time.
Yeah, so Nick, there's a lot to talk about on the cloud attachments. Probably that can be an entire webinar on its own. But a couple key points is, first of all, now with the new ability to pull out those or collect those attachments, one of the key things is when it's exported, it is exported showing it as an actual attachment. It's not just a separate file that exists in your exported data set. It is associating it with the original message, which is something that it didn't do before. Again, this is also only in advanced. So if you are using core, then you have to think about other ways of potentially finding that data, such as what we used to do was parse through all of the individual emails to look for the links. And then have to do another search and collect those afterwards, and then try to rematch them all up. It got to be a huge mess. So this feature really simplified a lot of our process. One thing that I will point out is, so if Nick sent me an email and it had the attachment, and I'm the custodian, so that email itself that's sitting in my inbox or my mailbox, wherever it is, is obviously searchable. The attachment itself, because it's a cloud attachment that's sitting in Nick's OneDrive and he's not a custodian and is not in the scope of the search, it actually won't be searched. So it's only still searching the actual email that exists within the custodian. So you do have to think a little bit broader in terms of what are the data sources maybe that you have to include. And also from a preservation perspective, today, because it's not actually, that retention policy isn't in place yet, you do have to think through, okay, is that data that's sitting in Nick's OneDrive going to be preserved? Because if Nick deleted the document, the Word document that was attached, it may very well be gone and it can't collect that Word document anymore because it no longer exists. Even though I've been on hold for 3 months and it was only sent 2 months ago. So just a couple of things to absolutely be conscious of here, but in terms of heading in the right direction, these are definitely some really, really key features that have improved the way that we do eDiscovery internally at Microsoft.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachi. Yeah, so let me try and zoom through a few of these others and we'll deep dive into some of this stuff in the next session. I mentioned the other piece is, hey, I need scale and I need speed. And so we had some requirements from some key customers to say, hey, we need to be able to do really large cases. We need to be able to handle up to 40 million records within a single case. We want to be able to handle a terabyte of data at a time within each collection. And so we started working on working through the way that we manage the data from the source workload, think about Exchange and SharePoint, into advanced eDiscovery, and even out of advanced eDiscovery for further downstream management. And so now we have a large case feature. This is fully public preview. Hopefully you had a chance to check it out. We've created a fork. So when you create a case, you either go into a large case with kind of this new method of batching the content and handling through the pipeline, or a normal case, which has the same kind of way that you've been utilizing your case in advanced eDiscovery. And so now you can kind of do these large collections and pull this data through. A couple of key things: we are collecting the cloud attachments and threading conversations by default into these large cases. That kind of helps us normalize the data through and also create more consistency in kind of the ways that you're managing the data. And then we're providing, visibility and reporting into the size of your various review sets that you have in a case. So you can kind of manage across review sets through the process to make sure that, hey, you're getting, able to get the data you need out in a timely way. And then, next up, I wanted to just touch on this teams as threaded conversations a little bit more deeply. This is something that has been a great advanced eDiscovery feature so far with the proliferation of teams. But what we're doing is kind of updating the way that we handle these conversations. And I think we can just go to the next slide. I might have a lag, but there we go. The way that people are interacting with this Teams content, we're seeing a much different, and we're hearing from customers that it's much different than email, where email is kind of long form or chat-based, it's rapid back and forth, as you're well aware. And with the volume of the Teams, already surpassing volume of emails in a lot of organizations, having ways to efficiently manage this and handle this is really important. So what we've done is started to thread these conversations into HTML transcripts. And this helps with the scale that I was just talking about for the large cases and pulling large amounts of data. But we also are able to improve kind of the metadata that's associated with these conversations and created a kind of a more durable HTML format so that, hey, this is a little bit more reliable and performant as it goes through the process. But also the new metadata with Teams channel name, message kind, those things that customers are really looking for as they kind of were doing more in Teams. And then, of course, we're going to reduce the overall content that you're faced with managing downstream, because we're taking these conversations and merging a bunch of individual items into a singular larger item, and then giving you the metadata to manage that as well effectively. So I think we've got one more, and then we'll just do a little bit on what's next before we break and see if we have time for questions. But wanted to hit on the automation. So a big piece that we hear from a lot of customers is, hey, we need to be able to do these things that I'm doing all of the time, kind of in an automated, repeatable way. And so we know in core eDiscovery, a lot of customers have leveraged the commandlets that are available via PowerShell. And that's good, and we think that's really helped a lot of the ways that their customers are automating processes. But with advanced e-discovery, we saw opportunity to kind of move to a graph API model. And we think that this is good for a couple of different reasons. You know, Microsoft Graph is a platform. So if you have teams or folks in your organization who are familiar with Graph already, then their knowledge is going to be transferable. Also, we expect that the API format will be kind of more durable and performant over time. So we're really investing a lot in these e-discovery APIs now. The entire workflow is available in beta, pre-production, and we're anxiously moving that towards general availability. Keep an eye on the roadmap. We're tracking it there. But this is really where you can start to harness kind of each of the steps in the workflow via the API. So, hey, create your case, collect content, get estimates for your collection, add that content to the review set. All of those individual things that you're going to do in the context of a case, you can now kind of automate and establish via an API. We've already seen some really cool proof of concepts from some partner organizations and some from customers. So if you haven't yet, take a look. There's kind of a short link there. But as we bring these to GA, this is definitely going to be the place where we're looking to see most customers do their automation going forward. Okay, kind of talking quickly. Rachi, anything to fill in that I missed? Color commentator?
Other than the fact that, yeah, the APIs and ability to automate is huge, especially when you're looking at how do I scale within a corporate legal department. And I'll again, push it a little towards the part two. But yeah, that's one of the key things is the ability to automate as much as possible. And while we love, in some cases, and sometimes not so much, but the user interface and the ability to do some certain functionality within the tool itself using the web interface, a lot of it you just want to automate, especially because from a process standpoint, it ensures consistency, that it's all being done in the same way each time through the process. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, thanks for that. So then just quickly, kind of what's next, and we can spend a little bit more time here in the follow-up session, but the main message is we're actively listening to our customers, working with key design partners to kind of make sure that what we're building and delivering is going to meet the needs. And you can kind of see the trends that we're seeing, and Jennifer shared a bunch on where we think we need to go to help customers be more successful. But it's more teams, more things around teams. We see a big opportunity with kind of all the volume of teams and the meeting recordings that are coming up. More SharePoint. We hear from customers they want to go deeper into understanding, within documents, what's happened within versions, and kind of be able to reason and search across that level as well. And then we'll, continue to listen. We have a active list that we're working on now, and we continue to refine and iterate over our backlog and bring things up. So, bring your voice to the table, connect with Jennifer and Caroline and Rachi, and share kind of your perspective on what things are going to be really important for your organization as well. With that, I guess we're just at time. I'll hand it back over. Thank you so much, and looking forward to hope some of you can join us next time around for the tips and tricks.
Wonderful. Well, it looks like we're just about at time. We've got a few questions that we will cover in the next session. So please make sure to sign up for the subsequent session to learn some more tips and tricks. Thanks very much to our panelists, Jennifer, Nick, Rachi. Thanks to ACEDS for hosting us. And thanks to all of you for joining. We look forward to seeing you again next time. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.